And welcome back to Fast Track to CPO with me, Ross Webb. Today, I'm super excited because I'm here with Spencer Skates, who is the co-founder and CEO of Amplitude. And Spencer, thank you so much. And it's so great to have you here on the podcast and our YouTube channel. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it's fantastic to be here, Ross. I have a ton of respect for what you do. You built out an absolutely amazing audience. And I'm really excited to talk about the trends we're seeing with product leaders and changes in executives. I think we've been on the front lines of that for a lot of years at Amplitude. So really excited to get into things.
Awesome. And just for the listeners, just because, I get asked a lot of the personal stuff and I know someone's going to ask me, but what about Amplitude and blah, blah, blah. But I want to say, I love Amplitude and I love the people at Amplitude. And I've been working with Amplitude now for a good couple of years, but only because I love the product, because I built myself a personal app just before COVID. And there was an amazing kind of free tier, a huge amount of MAUs, installed it, fell in love with it, got to know the people there. So this isn't like, hey, Ross is an Amplitude guy. It's Ross is the product guy who happens to feel it's the best product out there. And Spencer, you might not know this, well, you definitely don't know this, but I'm going to share this, and not to put you on the spot or anything, but I think it's a great little story. But, having worked with Jan and Angela and some other people who are working in the marketing department in Amplitude for the UK and other countries in Northern Europe, I had a tumor removed a few months ago. I had a really bad health scare, really bad. And they were the people that sent me flowers. They just sent me flowers saying, hope you feel better. They didn't even know how bad it was. And I must say, and this is just a testament to actually how great the people are behind Amplitude for me personally. And again, not to try and put you on the spot, but they're just awesome. And I love them. So I just wanted to share that kind of personal experience. But let's get into the actual...
I can't even imagine. Holy smokes. Well, I hope you're doing all right now. That's sort of a life-changing, health thing to go through. And I can't even imagine. So I'm just glad that, the folks that on our team were able to be supportive and kind to you, and those sort of moments really can be life changing. So I appreciate it, and I'm a big believer in the power of technology to make our lives better, and that's why I'm in this business. And one of the things you forget is that sometimes can easily is the personal side. So I'm really honored that you had that experience with our team. Thanks for sharing.
You've got an amazing team. Like Angela, Jan, I love them. And yeah, I don't want to gloss over that, but I do want people to realize this is not just a piece of software. There's some amazing people behind there that just, as you said, in life-changing times, they were there for me, and I love them. But, so really, just huge amount of love and respect there. But, so one of the things I really want to talk about today is the rising power, let's say, of products, or maybe that's power sometimes has a negative word, but, there's been such a great move in the last, I've been in, technology space for over 20 years, and having seen, like CTOs, CROs, CPOs, and I'd love to get your thought about that and kind of the rise of product leaders, if I can put it like that. What have you been seeing? Because you talked a lot more than I do.
Yeah, it's been incredible. I think just to take a step back, I think you've seen this trend where technology has empowered a new executive every decade. And so if you go back really long ago, to the 1980s, the very first executive that started to become common in a lot of these companies was the CIO, where you wanted to digitize a lot of what you were doing operationally. And companies realized it required a specialized technology expertise. And so a lot of power ended up consolidating under CIOs to help drive that. And we joke about CIOs now being kind of old and stodgy, but they were at the forefront of building technology, and that function was a huge beneficiary of a lot of the initial rise in back office software and just moving things to computers. And then you had the CTO in what I think of as the 1990s and 2000s, where a lot of companies realized you needed a software presence, whether that be online or offline. and to reach your customers, because that's where people were going to be spending a lot more time. And that led, to the rise of the CTO. And then I think in the last decade, you've really seen the rise of the chief marketing officer, where online has just exploded as a channel to reach consumers. It's way bigger than any other channel out there. You can reach billions of people, way better. It's literally all the people on the planet, for the very first time through a single channel. And so because of that, and people realize that their storefronts are now going from physical or in person or through someone else's channel to the online channel. And so even if you're the biggest retailer in the world, like Walmart, you realize that that's where the future of your business sits. And so you have to invest big in chief marketing. And so I think what we're seeing now is the next iteration of this, which is I think of as the chief product officer, where it's not just the storefront that's going online, it's the entire product experience. So whether you're a media application like Netflix or Disney or NBC or HBO, so much of your user base is now actually, you're getting more revenue from the revenue growth from, that's the one part of your business is growing, is online. Everything else, the theaters, the cable streaming, all of that part of your business is shrinking. The broadcasting rights, all of that is shrinking, and it's just the online part of the business that's growing. Or you look at retail, like I mentioned, Walmart. It's been incredible. Like one of the customers we work with is Under Armour, and they have made such thoughtful investments into their online product experiences that it's just put them a tier above a lot of other companies I've seen. Like one of the really cool stories I've seen with them is that they have a shoe which tracks your running performance in real time, sends that data to your phone, and then gives you real-time coaching on how you can improve your running. And they found that people who use that improve their running speed by an average of 7%. And what's really crazy about that is now they can go to all their customers and they can say, hey, all these other apparel companies, if you go with Nike, if you go with Adidas, they just sell you apparel, but we have the data to show that we can actually sell you faster running. And that's ultimately what you want as an athlete. If you're buying a pair of shoes, or you're working, or if you're working with a particular company. And so that entire insight was led by the chief product officer there. And so, pick your industry, you name it, it's the businesses of all of these companies are coming online, and you need an executive who's in charge of managing and driving and making that revenue stream really successful. And that's the chief product officer. And so we've seen this massive increase. Our thing is 2020 is the decade of the chief, it's a decade of coronavirus, but also the decade of the chief product officer. And the funny thing is, when we first started Amplitude, people were so skeptical, because it's like, okay, you're going to tell me you're going to sell to the organization with very little headcount, no direct budget authority, no ownership of anything, has to lead by influence and just, telling other people what to do. And you're going to build a business on that. And we're like, yeah, because we think they're going to be the next big executive. And just like the chief marketing officer went from this, it used to be you had chief marketing officers that were very much, it was the same thing. You didn't have any budget. You kind of outsourced a lot to ad agency. It was very Mad Men. We have this thing, it was like, marketing used to be like Mad Men, where you just come up with the cool tagline and the cool story, and, you don't really know if it works. To today, the great CMOs are very operationally intensive, technical, they're kind of nerdy types that are really quantitative and in the numbers. And that's thanks to the entire function transitioning online. And so that led to this huge explosion of the MarTech industry and all the infrastructure behind it, Adobe, being the biggest, but, tons of other great companies in that world. And so I think we saw the same trends happening in the product management function when we started Amplitude in 2012. And we said, hey, this is going to require a whole new set of infrastructure, and let's go ahead and build that company. And so, so far it's been working great. We've obviously done really well. Went public last year, past 100 million in revenue. There's a real business on this thing. And so now just the question is, one, how big is it going to be? And then two, how is the space really going to play out? And so we're really excited to serve chief product officers generally. I'd say the other trend that I think we see happening, and part of why chief product officers are becoming so influential, is that I think if you think about the customer journey, historically you have a function that's tied to each part of the customer journey. So you have, marketing that's tied to the start of the customer journey and top of funnel to get interest. You have sales that's tied to, to closing customers. You have your customer success function that's tied to the post sales. You have your product that's tied to the usage. And so they're all kind of siloed in different parts of the customer journey. But as a customer, I don't think of those parts of the journey as different. I don't care whether I'm receiving a marketing email or an in-app notification or I'm using your app. It's all part of one customer experience. And so what we've seen is you need someone to think about and own that holistically end to end. And so that I think my expectation is we're going to see consolidation from a lot of these very siloed organizations to one. Like the biggest example is the marketing and product functions converging. A lot of the marketing leaders at tech companies have a product background. Like Facebook CMO or Meta CMO, Alex Schultz, he is a product and growth data person at his core. You see this across a lot of companies where they're actually thinking of marketing now as part of the product. And so our expectation is that the end result of all of these trends is that you get the empowerment of the chief product officer, from over the next decade, in terms of being the most important executive in the C-suite.
That's brilliant. That's a really great number of thoughts there, Spencer. I mean, I've been blessed enough to meet your chief product officer and hear him talk and give us some insights. And he's great. And while I'm specifically not mentioning his name because I don't want to talk about individuals, I'd love to get your thoughts on traits that great chief product officers have. I mean, you've mentioned, let's say, some traits is obviously going to be the data focused and, kind of nerdy, and various other traits that you mentioned to people. And maybe it's because I like to throw myself into those categories. I think that's awesome. But I'd love to get your thoughts, because you've spoken to loads of CPOs now. Like, what makes a great CPO? I'd just love to give your thoughts around traits and things that you've picked up over the years.
So I think you're seeing a lot of the same trends happening in the product leaders as you did in marketing leaders. I think historically, chief product, like people think of chief product officers as these Steve Jobs visionaries that, have this brilliant idea for a product and, just tell everyone what to do and the whole thing comes to life and they really nail it. But I think that could not be further from the truth. I think the best product leaders are spending all of their time getting feedback and really deeply understanding the customer and their problem. And so we have this thing at Amplitude where our expectation is every person in the product organization spends at least 50% of their time talking with customers, whether that's jumping on sales calls, sharing the product roadmap, helping them out with issues, like that product club thing that we did, Ross. And so whatever the form is, I think that's the number one attribute. And what's funny is even Steve Jobs spent quite a bit of time, it didn't come out in the brand, it was like, hey, you have this giant, big marketing reveal for, the new iPhone or whatever else, and that they were known for. But that was actually based on tons and tons and tons of customer research and a deep understanding of the customer. Like they had one of the really big innovations that the iPhone came out with was getting rid of the keyboard, from the BlackBerries. And that was based on a lot of customer conversations with them. And so I think that's one thing, whether it's modern or whether it's, old school product people, that I think everyone has really had in common in terms of a great product leader is a deep understanding of the customer. And, what's funny is I think a lot of the DNA at least in Silicon Valley, where we're based, comes from Google, in terms of best practice. Like that's why we all give everyone free food at lunch and, all these other like little funny cultural practices. But honestly, I think I, in my mind, I'm so anti-Google in terms of like their time and understanding. Like they spent all these time creating spec docs and getting buy-in from engineers and really internally focused as opposed to customer and, customer problem focused. And I think, that's, and they built a great business, don't get me wrong. But I think in my mind, what makes for great product leaders is almost the exact opposite. And so a lot of the folks I see come out of there, I'm like, no, like this is the wrong way. I remember, there's so many companies where they don't even talk to the customer, where the product people don't even talk to customers. I think it's a huge mistake. And that's why I think you see them, do strategies that just don't make sense or what have you. So, I think that as a big one. I'd say in terms of what's changing, is that there's a whole new slew of tools, Amplitude among them, that allow you to really quantitatively understand your customer in a way you just haven't been able to before. So, my story earlier about Under Armour being able to understand that how their product led to you becoming a faster runner, that's an insight you could have never gotten before. Historically, it's like you put the product out there, you just leave it for someone to consume. You have no idea how it's being used in practice. But in a lot of ways, this is like, I call this the last barrier in great product development, because as product builders, we have all these amazing tools. We've got agile processes, and we have all these basically modern product development is like you're kind of gluing different libraries together because the vast majority of engineering, it's already been built. And so the hard part is really, you can build, a reasonable team can build almost anything. The hard part is understanding, hey, is this what someone wants? Is this what my customer wants? And that's almost impossible to do. It's kind of random. Like sometimes you hit it, sometimes you don't. And so being able to measure that and quantify it and understand that deeply for the first time is so amazingly powerful and makes, you as a product leader so much better. Like so many of the best companies I've seen out there, like Atlassian's a big, customer of ours, and they have this thing around, they're one of the poster childs for product-led growth. And the reason is because they've shifted what are traditional marketing and sales functions to say, hey, let's actually understand how our customers adopt more product based on how they're using it already. And so they've turned their product into a distribution channel for themselves. And so I think the very best companies out there are taking, the ones that are at the forefront are taking the process of building a product and turning it into a science and combining that with the art side of it.
I love that. I've had quite a bit of experience in marketing. I've got a couple of awards behind me winning two UK Gold Fresh Awards, which are the UK's marketing awards. No one can see my chair's blocking. But I want to just give a quick example. We had this great product we were about to launch. We'd had a web version. We were about to launch the mobile native apps version of it. And there's a huge amount of turnover. It's like $500 million at the time. It eventually became over $1 billion turnover. But what we did was we were able to apply our events and Amplitude, and we saw that even though the transaction values of a certain product that people would buy, which in this case were discounted cinema tickets, transaction value very low, number of transactions really, really high. But what we saw was that people who bought cinema tickets were 400% more likely to actually go on to buy other more expensive things like $10,000 holidays somewhere, like for a ticket to somewhere. So we created that, and we were able to then go to marketing and get a budget to subsidize the cinema tickets even more. And so marketing became kind of part of our product, we launched these native mobile apps, and we did $50 million in sales through the native apps in 6 months. Only because we had that data point. And I'm saying that because, just to reinforce what you're saying. And that was one of the things that also helped really kind of catapult my career. And I'm saying that for the listeners who are thinking about their careers, once you get this stuff right and you can apply it, I think career-wise, the sky's the limit, and the world's your oyster, and any other kind of analogy I can find. But it really, really skyrockets. So once you spend the time trying to understand these things, just what Spencer's saying, it's absolute gold. And Spencer, I know we don't have much more time, but I want to just ask you two last questions, if you don't mind. Actually, let's take what I think.
By the way, Ross, just on that cinematic, I think that's a phenomenal example. I mean, you being able, I think the vast majority of what people put out there in product, they have no idea what the value is. And so we're just at the beginning of tapping into understanding that. And so that insight that you uncovered, that cinema tickets were that much more valuable because they led to 400% more purchases elsewhere. I mean, that's, you are much better understanding what the purpose of your product is and that user journey and how that works. And so that is transformational for your business. And so I totally agree. If you can find even just one insight like that and make the business run more effectively, you can build a whole career off of that.
Absolutely. And to your point, that only worked because I had the head of customer success and product marketing and marketing all behind me buying into this. But I could substantiate that with the data, as I mentioned at the top of the interview. Thanks so much to Amplitude Beer. And I also didn't have to fight to try and get the budget because you had that great free tier that I could get in there and go, okay, wow. And now it wasn't coming out. So really, really appreciate that.
Absolutely. I'm happy you could use it.
I'm happy I can share that example. Like I've been a fan of Amplitude ever since. So, a lot of teams do come into that. Well, hang on a second. It's so obvious to people like me and you, having been in it now and seen what an amazing impact it has. But what I'd love to hear directly from you, we've only got a few more minutes, is how do you recommend people that maybe more, let's say, individual contributor or senior PM or PM or more junior levels, what can they do to really kind of move up the ladder, trying to use data? How do they learn more of it? How do they get their hands on it? I used to coach a whole bunch of people, and when I'd say to them, hey, who wants to learn Amplitude? They all put up their hands, and then I started doing all these Amplitudes, which I've done for Amplitude for the last, I think, 11 months. I started just once a month. I teach people, users, everyone I speak to, come, let me teach you, come use this stuff. So I'd love to get your thoughts, how people, how people can really use it to kind of help their career and get ahead here.
I'd say if the key thing is just help the organization. What is the role of product? The role of product, in my mind, is to help the rest of the organization understand the customer and the problem the best. If that's all you do as a product leader, phenomenal. It's not your job to write great spec sheets or perfectly design a feature. If you can do that, if you can share a nugget of insight, like if you can tell the rest of the organization, like, hey, movie tickets, cinema tickets are much more valuable than we thought, that is gold, because that helps you achieve better product market fit and as an organization. And that helps people understand what's what. Because like right now, today, you just kind of put out the products, black box, you don't really know how you use it. You kind of get some anecdotal feedback here and there, but you don't really understand that customer journey. And so if you can just share one insight like that, that's what I always look for in the product managers at Amplitude, is how well do they understand the customer? So, it's very common to talk about, hey, we're going to launch this feature or we're going to put this out there. My number one question to them, what customers are going to use this? Like, give me the names. And I want to see how well you understand why they need this thing. Like, are they dying for it? Are they saying, hey, my business needs this to run? Are they saying, hey, this is the deal breaker for us to use Amplitude? Like, how well do you really understand what it is your customers need? And so if you can share that to me, that's gold for me as a CEO. That's all I'm looking to get out of a product leader. I don't need the perfectly defined spec sheet or the capabilities doc, or it's not project management. It is how well do you understand the customer and their problem. And if you can give me any insight around that, that to me is gold, and that to me is a sign that I want to put you in more positions of leadership and influence. And because that's the role. Like I think of any company, it's like you have all these resources, all these people, and it's like a giant cannon. And the role of the product function is to tell you where that cannon should point. And that's a really freaking important role, because you want to hit the target. There's a lot of places you can point that cannon that are going to totally miss. And so I have these really expensive resources, my entire company, and what we're building. And I want to be damn sure that I'm pointed at the right target. And so the more you can convince me that you understand what that target is and what that, you just give me even a nugget on that, like that to me is a sign that, I want you to have more influence and leadership within the organization.
That's awesome. And
by the way, just one other thing on that, like that doesn't have to necessarily, that can come from Amplitude and product data. That can also come from talking to customers. I'm not religious about how you get that insight. And so, it's not like, hey, you have to be the best technologist in the world or know the data tool the best. It's just, those are all tools to help you understand the customer problem.
100%. I remember doing a client's advisory board for 15 of our biggest enterprise clients, massive companies like Tesco level and stuff, and we had the CPOs there. And I remember our CEO suggested a feature which I thought sounded great. I mean, and we presented it to them. They were a good cross section. We had 15 of them. We bought them all phones and went through that, and they all hated it. They were like, "This is terrible. This is a terrible." And I was like, I'm being South African, I wasn't used to English people, British people, kind of being so kind of emotional about features, and I was like, "Oh my god!" And they had really good uh, thoughts and reasons why it was such a bad idea. That because we weren't in their shoes, we didn't quite understand until we'd actually really put it in front of them, asked them to play around with it and do it. So yeah, that didn't come from, as you said, didn't come from software, but it came from getting them in a room and speaking to them as humans.
Yes.
And the other thing we did there is we actually had a videographer to film them, which we shared with our engineers so that they could actually see. It's not just like your CPO like me saying, "Hey, make the button green," because you're the CPO. It's just like, "Hey, watch the customer, see what they were saying, how they're playing it, get it, and then we got everybody together and they could all share their thoughts after watching, slightly edited videos." So Spencer, I love that example. So what do you think it really, really takes for product teams to be truly data-driven and customer-centric? I mean, we've spoken about how to be customer-centric, you've got to talk to them, you've got to get out of the virtual building, wherever that is. But where do you see that they really get blocked, and how have you seen people get around any of those particular blockers?
Yeah. So for sure, the half the time with customers, I'm not even saying half the time in Amazon, I'm saying half the time directly talking to them. And so if you're not even doing that, don't even start with the analytics or the data, talk to the customers first. You need to get a good muscle around that. And that's where I see a lot of teams skip over. There's lots of good reasons. As a product leader, you're always busy. You're meeting with internal stakeholders, you're creating docs, you're helping project manage things. Like there's lots of things to do. And so it's very easy to forget that. And so that would be the first thing I'd say. In terms of the data and how to get around blockers, I would say you always want to use, like, one of the mistakes I see teams make is they over pivot and set, like, they go from having no quantitative goals based around the data to everything as a quantitative goal based around the data. And I found generally that's too extreme of a pivot. And so even here at Amplitude, like, probably about half the goals, like if you look at the OKRs of the product team, half of them have a quantitative metric associated with them, but half of them don't. They're more qualitative, like, they're like, "Hey, get a customer to use this feature, or release this out the door." And the reason for that is, like, we're still learning about the customer journey. So it's not like we've mapped out everything about how someone uses Amplitude perfectly. And so the way we think about, I think there was one time where we did try to push everyone towards having a metric-based product goal, and it was a total disaster because there were a lot of cases where it didn't make sense. If your product is very early and just still finding product market fit, you actually want to have a different set of metrics or a different set of North Stars. If you're building a feature for a specific set of users, really the check should be, did those users use the feature and did they get value out of it? And so thinking about I think we're still early in this world of product data. And so it's not like everything, immediately transitions to, as a product leader, to a fully quantitative goal. It's like, you want to be thoughtful about, right? Again, it's where do you paint the target for the rest of the company? You want to be, and the really good product leaders do that exceptionally well.
I think that's really, really valid. The other thing that I've seen, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is people sometimes get really intimidated with data or with analytics. I've seen a lot of people who, I come from an engineering background into product, and I love diving deep and doing that stuff, which is also why I love, the Amplitudes. But I see some people get intimidated, or they think about analytics and they think, "Oh my God, that's, that lives in the data lake. And to talk to the guys in the data lake, I've got to wait 6 months and they're all busy and it's June. So I could probably see them before Christmas for 30 minutes type of thing." What would your advice be for people who've kind of got that mindset?
This is what we're a huge believer in at Amplitude, which is, how do you self-service that data? If you can just get a tiny amount of familiar with the data, just look at a dashboard every day of DAUs, or just look at your basic funnel. just start with something very, very, very small. Your capability and ability to understand and empower yourself, you're going to put yourself ahead of everyone else in an organization who doesn't do that. And so I think, one of the crazy things is that, like, there are a lot of teams that operate under the model you just said, where they have the central data team control everything, and you have to submit a ticket to get everything out. I remember I was talking to Airbnb a few years back, and they tried to do this model where they say, we're going to have a data scientist for every single product manager in the organization. And I'm like, that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. Like, this is Airbnb, who has, almost unlimited resources to do something like this, but even they couldn't get a data scientist for every single product person. And so I think that model is broken. And so I'd encourage people that are building out organizations to go with the model of, hey, how can you self-serve and empower your teams? And I'd also encourage people who are product people to go to places where they can do that for themselves. And again, you don't have to be the most sophisticated data person, but it's the difference between being able to build a little bit of Excel spreadsheet yourself to manage your own budget, or something, or do a little bit of math yourself, or organize yourself, versus having to always outsource that. And I think the model where everyone empowers yourself, that's the way the world's going. Now, the great thing is we're in such the early days, so you just need a little bit of skill to be ahead of everyone else on it. And so, as much as that might feel really scary and intimidating, and stuff in the data is crazy, go to places and go to organizations that encourage that self-serve data, and just get a little bit familiar with the basic. You can start on Google Analytics. I hesitate to run Google Analytics, recommend Google Analytics because they have all sorts of issues. But in terms of getting started with the basics, they're great too. You can at least understand some of the basics of how many users you're getting, how that's trending over time, and some breakdowns of that. And so that will empower you to be so much stronger as skill set wise than anyone else, than the vast majority of folks out there. So that would be my recommendation.
I love that. I think that's so valid. And I'd love to, as we wrap up, I'd love to just recommend anybody who's listening. Spencer's got an incredible individual working for him called Mallory, and Mallory does a lot of awesome content and Amplitude.
Mallory's great. I love Mallory.
Yeah, she's just awesome. And she created this amazing kind of webinar, but it's an experiential webinar where you go through it and you actually get to run, do your own funnel, do correlation, regressions and analyses, retention analyses and funnels. And it's a really, really exciting 45 to, 60 minutes, depending where in the world you are. And I'm not just saying that because I really enjoy teaching it. I'm saying that because I just think it's awesome. And I think Mallory's brilliant. So absolutely, if you'd like to dive in deeper, we've also had another podcast episode with John Cutler from Amplitude as well, dives into the difference between product analytics, marketing analytics, and tools like Google Analytics. And I know Amplitude's got a lot of new features coming around at that stage, but it is still a nice way to just kind of drop in, just drag a snippet of code, and then you've got access really, really quickly. So Spencer, again, I really want to thank you so much for joining me today. It's really been a pleasure talking about something that honestly I could talk about for the rest of the day, no problem. So massively appreciate that. If there's any way that you'd love to send people who are listening to at Amplitude, or anything you'd like them to check out or send them before you leave, feel free to give a shout out to whoever or wherever you'd like to send them.
Yeah, Ross. Well, first, I just want to say thank you. It's always a pleasure to work with people like you, because you get the way the world is going. And the challenge we have is we're trying to convince everyone this is the way of the future, to use product data to really understand their customers. And it takes time. Most people aren't there yet. They don't see the future in quite the same way. So it's always a pleasure to talk with you and to spend time. And I'd say if you're based in London, come to our product clubs. Ross and I were just hanging out last month, and we had an awesome panel, and I gave a talk. And so we're going to be doing those monthly in London. So come out to those. We'd love to see you in person. The weather's great. It was beautiful when I was there, which is just phenomenal. So it's a great time to come out, and you can just meet folks like Ross. Some of the folks that he mentioned on the Amplitude team. Talk to Laura, or talk to Zach, or talk to some of the other folks that we have there, because they'd be really excited to meet you, kind of teach you some of the stuff that I just went through with Ross, and what have you. So that would be the number one thing. We have a number of webinars that we do online. So you mentioned John, he hosts a regular webinar. I really highly recommend following John Cutler on Twitter, in terms of who really understands the pulse of great product management and where it's going in the future. He's great. The other thing I'd say is if you come from more of an old school world, like you've come from the Adobe world and the marketing world, and you're looking at a product, one person I'd recommend following is Adam Greco, who's similar to John, but he comes from the marketing world and the Adobe world. And so if you're looking to learn, hey, what's this new product thing? How do I do it? Follow him. He's always hosting events too. I'd follow him on Twitter or LinkedIn. And he can help get you up to speed with what's what and put you in touch with. I actually just literally saw him. He's in town for a little bit today, and he's really on the forefront of where a lot of the martech and marketing landscape is going to go. And we're convinced that, there's going to be a lot of convergence. So anyway, Ross, I just want to say thank you for having me on air. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. And you just totally get where the future is going to be and all this stuff. And so I'm so glad that, I'm so glad that, we've been able to work together over the years. And I'm really happy to hear, I'm glad that Amplitude, could play a small role in supporting you through what you're going through on the health side too. So thank you very much. And thank you to all the listeners who joined us in on the podcast.
Spencer, thanks so much for your time today. I've really appreciated it.
Ross, thank you. Thank you very much.